Hello, friends. Good afternoon, and welcome to Escambia Citizens Watch Live. I'm John Singley, your host, as always, and today we're going to continue our series on trees, for the love of trees. About 2 weeks ago now, I was listening to the Escambia County Planning Board session when they were talking about a possible revision of the county's tree ordinance. And one of the presenters who got up and made public comment was a fellow by the name of John Smith. And I thought what he said would be of great interest to all of us. So we invited John to come into the studio today. And whereas the planning board gives him 3 minutes, we're going to give him plenty of time today to talk more in detail about his project, which is called the Heritage Tree Trail Project. So John, welcome to Escambia Citizens Watch Live.
Thank you, John. I'm very, very proud and excited to be here.
Again, John was talking about a number of things that certainly caught my attention and many others, which include things from the historic tree trails of Escambia County in northwest Florida, as well as tree tourism in other parts and other cities in Florida that have been beneficial to the citizens. So John, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got interested in historic trees and this project in particular?
I'll be happy to, John. This all started probably about 8 years ago, and as you can see on the screen here, folks, I suppose, there we go. Yeah. From tiny acorns, mighty oaks grow, and it's hard to imagine that something of this size could end up 26 feet in circumference and 100 feet tall, possibly 250, 300 years old. So I developed a passion for these trees after seeing them removed here and there around the county. The Native Americans believe that white animals, albino animals, are forest spirits, and I can't say that I don't believe that myself. Sweet things.
John, I want to interrupt you for just a second here to let our viewers know that if you have any comments for John Smith or any questions you'd like for him to talk about, please make a comment on the Facebook page or group you're watching on this afternoon, and we'll certainly pass them along to John. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks, John. The first thing that really got my attention was probably 8 years ago or so. I'm not sure that it was that time frame, but Cedar Tree Lane up in Cottage Hill, right off Highway 95A, named, of course, for its beautiful cedars that line the road. The county paved the road, and in doing so, all the cedars were removed. And these cedars were 150, 200 years old. They were 10, 12-foot girth trees, not large enough to be considered what the county says is a heritage tree, but still a very large tree for a cedar. They don't grow quite as fast as other trees. So now Cedar Tree Lane, tragically enough, has no cedar trees. The next thing that happened was a couple of years later at the raceway on the corner of Muskogee Road and Highway 29, one of the giant trail trees that I had measured, which we'll get into that explanation in just a little bit, was going down, and I at that time had been out of UWF for a couple of years, and I was thinking, wow, I really need to go chain myself to this tree. I was desperate, but I have learned over the years that you need to pick your battles wisely. So I decided against that, chaining myself to the tree. So I said, okay, there's got to be another way. Well, a little later on, I've been by this sign in Cantonment. It sits currently, it used to be on Highway 29, right at the corner of Muskogee Road, and now it sits on Muskogee Road before you get to 29, this particular sign. And it talks about the grant to Manuel Gonzalez was a rectangle along the old Indian Trail extending 5 miles from Cantonment to Gonzalesville. I'm like, well, I've been around these old trees a lot, and I started noticing that they were in lines. So I got out my tape, my fiberglass tape, and my GPS, and I started measuring these trees. So it was very early in 2017, January, that I started my project. So the thing that really got me the most upset was out on the corner of 9 Mile Road at I-10. There was a giant apartment complex being constructed there, and it was in fact constructed. And I know we need places for people to live, and I'm not against our growth or development or anything like that. I'm for all of that stuff, but I just want us to use a little more conscience when we do it. Basically, what so upset me was the fact that they put up a big brown fence around all that trees that they were about to take down there. There was a knoll, and from my research, I do believe it was a place where people camped. They gathered and camped before or after crossing Perdita River, because the proximity is close. Anyway, they dug a 100-yard long road hole, 100-yard long hole, and a 100-yard wide hole, and basically dug the trees up, let them fall over in the hole, and burned them for about a week and a half. Tragic. I was mortified. And so I said, okay, that's it. So I started really in earnest measuring the trees. Then came May, and every time I see an excavator, folks, I get nervous. I figure it's on its way somewhere to dig something up, possibly a 100, 200, 300-year-old tree. This tree is in the front of the lot where you just saw the excavator. It sits on, it sat on 9 Mile Road, right across from the Sonic, and there's a Fusakli's there now, and the Schlotsky's, I think, is on the other end. And this tree was removed rather than make allowances for it like they had done down the street in the Winn-Dixie parking lots and the crossover in the Hardee's and in different places where they had preserved their trees. I worked for a couple of weeks to try and stop this tree from being removed without success. Sadly to say, it was taken down. However, out of the travesty that happened, I decided that we could make some good come out of this. So I was able to talk the developers into allowing me to cut the trunk of the tree, and take it. They were so kind to give me the tree for research, and I was having trouble at that time. Still, there's not a lot of information out there about how to age a live oak tree. It's just not out there. There's plenty of stuff on the internet, but most of it's conflicting. So I knew from my own personal well-being and the research of the project that I would need to actually perform a ring count. Well, as you can see, this tree is 15 feet in girth. It was not large enough to be a heritage tree according to the current tree regulations. It missed it by about a half a foot in circumference. So I don't know what they did or what they had to do or any stuff. I'm not a political person. So I got the tree to my house, and proceeded to slice off some slices so I could do my ring count. And at this point, everybody that knows me thought I had completely lost my mind, and they weren't far from wrong. As you can see, this tree across, depending upon how you measure it, if you measure from top to bottom, it's about 68 inches across, and from top to bottom there. So the diameter is well over the 60 inches, but if you go left to right, it's like 50 inches. So it depends on, who measured it and how long they measured it as to whether or not it's a very subjective thing sometimes. There are hard and fast rules for measuring the trees, but it can be very subjective. The two centers you see in this tree trunk laying there on its side are evidence that there were two limbs and not just one tree. If you look to the top right and the top left, there's a crack in the center of the tree, and that is bark, where there were two large limbs. And about 75 years ago, those limbs grew together to be one tree. Now this is a slice. The star crack on the right is the center of the tree, and this is a picture of the rings of the tree so I could do the accurate ring count. We're looking at about 175 years old tree right here. And I used some Thompson's oil to provide contrast for easier counting, and that was very, very helpful. Live oak trees are phenomenally tough, and they can grow either pretty slow or they can grow quite fast. The picture on the left you see is at Chance Road up in Molina. Now, during my research, I ran across Chance Road and thought that I had found something that had been planted by the Spanish, because these trees are all 15 feet, around. They're 15 feet in girth. But if you look at the trees on the left versus the tree on the right, the trees on the left were planted by Don Sutton in 1960. I had to go to the Molina Historical Society and find his daughter to verify that. I was measuring the trees, and some elderly couple were on the porch, and they said, "Oh, we know when those trees were planted, sir." And I'm like, "Sure you do, Granny. I figured your medication wasn't working or something. Surely you couldn't know when these trees were planted. They're too old." Well, I was completely wrong. The trees in front of you there on the left on Chance Road are 60 years old. They can grow 3 foot every 10 years in girth with the perfect growth pattern. This is all the light that they need, all the moisture they need, good fertilizer. You'll notice the trees on the left, it's only maybe 3 or 4 feet to the first limb, whereas the tree on the right that sits on 9.5 Mile Road, it's a 18-foot girth tree, and as you can see, there's no comparison as the ways the trees look. The tree on the right was grown in a forest type setting, having to compete for light and nourishment, while the trees on the left had full access, space, light, and nutrition. So when you look at a live oak tree, most people think that a tree that's 18 or 20 foot around is way older than it really is. And I was under the same assumption, but I, like many people, have learned that that was not the case. This was the first tree I ever measured. It's in Gonzales on the corner of Rusty Lane, and we'll get to it. I want you to remember this tree as it's a 22-footer, and that's my little grandson helping me out there with the tape. But this tree, I believe, is a corner tree that's listed on the 1771 map, which we'll be able to see in just a little bit. Lane, and we'll get to it. I want you to remember this. The historic trees versus the heritage trees. This is a cedar that's 15 foot in girth. It's a white cedar. It's right there at Detroit and Pine Forest Road. You can see this tree. Everybody goes by it, whizzing by these trees every day, and has no clue. This tree is at least 150 years old.
John, let me say once again, I really like this next picture coming up, by the way. I want to say once again to people that are watching us right now, if you have any questions for John, or you just want to make comments that he could address, please put them in your Facebook page as a comment, and we'll certainly pass them along to him. Many of these trees we do know. We do pass by them quite a bit. We do see them every day, and we don't think much of them. Thanks for bringing them to our attention. What have we got here?
This is a 21-foot 7-inch tree that's over on the corner of Bush Street at Pine Forest Road. There's a lane of these trees. We'll see a row of them here in a minute. But this tree is particularly special to me because it allowed me to once again confirm the growth rate. I was out measuring this tree, and a lady came out and says, "What are you doing to my tree?" And I says, "I'm measuring it." And of course I put in to tell her my story, and she says, "Well, there were some people out here in 1970 that measured my tree, and they said it was 17 feet in girth." And I was like, thank heavens, finally a standard of somebody that has had their tree measured, and now we know an exact length of time since it was measured and how big it is now. So we ended up, if you do the simple math of 17 feet to 22 and a half foot or so, you come up with the fact that it's grown about 4.5 foot in girth in 45 years, which is about a foot every 10 years in girth. So a 22-foot girth tree, circumference tree, is around 220 years old. A 15-foot girth, around 150. Now it can go either way because of drought conditions in its life and possible molestation by humans. There's good evidence that Native Americans used trail trees to guide them to resources off of game trails, such as housing, clay, projectile point material, water sources. Okay, and
John, tell us, don't mean to stop you
please,
there,
go
but
ahead.
now this is the part at Planning Board that I think got all of the Planning Board members' attention. Everybody's heads went up, and there was some questions asked about this, that the Native Americans use these trails, according to your research,
Yes,
I mean
sir.
the trees, to mark the trails. Let's talk some more about that.
I'll be happy to. The the Native Americans, as I said earlier, it's well documented. There are books out on it, and with pictures of the trees and whatnot. And most of them are up in the Central Plains in the Northwest, because unfortunately around here, between the fires and the logging industry that went on for many hundreds of years here, many trees have been removed for whatever reason along these trails. Now that brings me to the trails. I'm going to get further into that in a second, but this tree, once again, is fantastic. Now this one is on the other end of Bush Street. It's a 21-foot 10 girth tree, and there's a look down Bush Street, and you can see there's a row of them there. There's about 6 or 8 of them. That's looking towards Pine Forest Road from Bush Street, and it's on the right of way. And that's one of the things that concerns me most, John, is many of these trails. We didn't just, the Europeans went wherever the Indians went.
Right.
They didn't just blast out through the woods and start making a trail on their own.
They used Indian guides.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so many of our utilities, our railroads, our gas lines, highways run right along the old trails. So that being said, as we have growth and infrastructure is required, we can either dig these trees up and haul them to the dump, or we can build infrastructure around them, I believe, and use heritage tourism as a way to draw people to Pensacola in a green and healthy environment. It's a wonderful thing we have here.
So, heritage tourism, I'm sure that ties into historical tourism and architectural tourism.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit more about how the trees, these historic trees, would become something that tourists would want to come to Pensacola
Right.
in our area and look at.
Well, an example first is over in Tallahassee. They have canopy roads over there that the Leon County takes care of them. They got a grant from the Forestry Service to survey the trees and care for the trees, and I feel sure we could probably do some of the same things if we approach it in that manner. And what they did was they built around the canopy roads rather than ripping the trees up and hauling them to the dump. Now, granted, many of them were removed in Tallahassee back in the 60s, and that's where I got some of my information for the ring count and what have you from the 60s, when they took a bunch of trees out doing road planning from downtown. I'm sure they were on the old trails as well. However, how we can do this, in my opinion, is these things, if we build apartments around them, if we build malls around them, if we build infrastructure around these things, people will want to come and walk among these trees. I hear a lot of people say, oh, well, this tree's sick, or these trees are ailing and they need to be removed. Well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. If your granny of 97 years old was sick, would you want to withhold her medication? I'm sorry. I understand it's a tree, but at the same time, we shouldn't be so quick to just say, oh, this tree's sick, let's get it out of here. When in fact, maybe a little fertilizer, a little bit of arboring could make the tree come back nicely and live for another 200 years.
So, in your research, John, you are of the opinion that a wise and enlightened tree policy that recognizes the historical nature of some of these heritage trees could be an economic development tool. This could be something that would draw visitors who would then become new residents, or would tell more visitors to come here, and they'd put the hotels would be busier, and it would just be good business for the area.
Absolutely. If you have a bed and breakfast setting on an old trail, with some 200-year-old trees on it. I mean, who would not want to come and enjoy that? I just can't imagine, because those things, first of all, we have some of the largest trees in Escambia County that are left in Florida. So, when you get right down to it, if we keep on going at the rate we're going and ignore our history, I'm afraid we're going to lose it. Our forefathers, somebody took a lot of forethought to plant these trees. Now, I've been working mainly in the north end of the county, but let me tell you, south of I-10, if you go downtown, anybody's ever been downtown, you can see that there are 15 to 18 foot girth trees all over the place, and they appear to be in straight lines. Well, I believe the founding fathers planted those trees there so that there would be shade, so that there would be protection from winds, so that there'd be sources of protection from the elements for the houses being built. Fires. In Tallahassee, I believe the place burned down one time. They decided to plant more trees when they built the place back to help.
I just over the weekend on Facebook, somebody sent me some pictures of the military base housing at Tyndall Air Force Base,
Yes.
which was the epicenter of Hurricane Michael last fall. And one thing I noticed was every pine tree was either broken in half or completely uprooted, but all of the live oaks were still standing, even though their leaf and small branch structure had been stripped. Every single one of those trees, none of them appeared to have collapsed on houses.
That's
they
correct.
broke the wind in that vicinity in some of those areas.
John, you're absolutely right. The live oaks, it's very rare for them to get upended and have a root ball, effect and be blown over. They might lose a limb or two, going to lose all the leaves blown off of it, but the tree will survive. And they've been a symbol of strength and power for literally thousands of years.
Naval live oaks.
Right.
We may have the only National Park Service tree park that I'm aware of in the country, because these live oaks provided sturdy timbers for our men of war, our sailing warships. They could not be defeated. I mean, you could not blast a cannonball through these things. They could knock part of the timbers down.
Old Ironsides was made out of the oak.
It's an exciting idea, John. Where are you now with this project? What efforts are you taking now to put this project into motion and bring it to life?
Well, John, I'll tell you, I've been mainly trying to educate people.
Right.
Everyone I talk to says that they are completely blown away by this information. And I will say this, John, we forget in our modern age just how short a time it was when we didn't have quick transportation, when we needed something besides, our laptop or our iPhone to get somewhere.
John, I'm sorry. You had a map you showed, I think,
Oh, yes.
on your website or on your Facebook page. Is that map available today?
Yes, sir, it is, and I'll get to it in just a moment.
Good.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I lost my train there. 1820, 200 years ago. 1920, 100 years ago. In 1920, it took about a week to get to Jacksonville. There was only one road between Pensacola and Jacksonville, and it wasn't even paved the entire direction. Okay, it wasn't paved the whole way. And then in 1820, it took 6 weeks. Good luck to get from Pensacola to Jacksonville.
Was that the old Spanish Trail?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much. It was the old Indian Trail, and the Spanish used it, so we'll call it the old Spanish Trail. But, we're talking 6 weeks, and that's if the weather was good, if you didn't get killed by Indians or, starve or get washed away in a river or a flood. Now, we sit out here on our highways, and in 6 hours, we're from Pensacola to Jacksonville. I submit to you that if we'd have told somebody in 1820 that we could get from Pensacola to Jacksonville in 6 hours, they'd be trying to hang us for witchcraft.
Right.
Okay? So we whiz by these trees now, and with our windows rolled up, and got our iPhone out, and we're texting, and we're driving, and we got the self-driving car, and we're asleep in the back or whatever. We have completely lost touch with the old trails, and these old trails are what I'm about to get with you here. This is West Kingsfield, where there is a proposed highway annex to come off the interstate through, and this is one of the oldest trails in the country, I believe. These trees along this little stretch of road here, it's only about a quarter mile where the trees are, and it was not, these trees were there as a trailhead where people sheltered under the trees, because it's only about a mile on down to the Muskogee crossing where everybody crossed from all times that went west or east. I mean, it's the Muskogee crossing is it. There's not another one. This is another one of the large trees in the bottom right. You can't see it very well. It's about an 18-footer on West Kingsfield. This is the largest tree I've measured so far. It's in Sam's Club parking lot. You can see Sam's Club off to the left. I mean, Sam's Fun City. I'm sorry, not Sam's Club. Sam's Fun City. And it's a giant tree that was left. I submit that years ago there were engineers that knew the significance of these trees 50 years ago. I say that 50 years ago, a 50-year-old engineer knew what a trail tree was and that the trails were actually there. This is a 24-footer on Grimsley Street in Inslee. It's part of the north-south line.
These are beautiful neighborhoods, and the trees only make them more attractive.
Well, you know, and I have a lot of problems with folks that say, oh, you know, that's going to stifle development if we say you can't take these trees out.
Let's talk about that. That's what you hear frequently. I hear also is that there needs to be a reasonable balance between protecting the trees and economic development.
Absolutely.
How do you answer those kind of questions?
Well, for me personally, me not being a political person, I think we can't leave things to individuals. Unfortunately, you know, we have laws for a reason. Unfortunately, if everybody did what they were supposed to, we would not need any laws. However, that's not the case, and it's the same thing with ordinances. I know 30 years ago, we really didn't need the tree ordinance because people kind of did the right thing. They had enough property. They wanted the trees to shade their house. There wasn't all this energy-free cooling and things happening here, you know, so people needed this trees. And now I'm afraid that profit margin has taken over good sense in a lot of cases. And just in my unprofessional opinion, as a layman, that's what I see happening. Now, there are still plenty of businesses that take into account that the trees are there and try to work around them. And I understand, sure, trees are going to have to be removed sometimes. That's just the way it is. You know, there's no such thing as a hard and fast rule. The tree could be a danger to life or property. The tree could literally be sick, really sick, about to die. You know, other than that, I really have a hard time understanding how a tree that was around before Florida was a state can be owned. Now, I've had people tell me, oh, well, you know, I own this property. Listen, I've been owning property in Escambia County for 65 years, and I'm going to tell you something, I still don't own it. Do you own yours, John?
I'd like to think I do, but I don't think that you're right. I don't believe I do.
Well, at the end of the day, my taxes say that I don't own it because I have to pay $1,000 a year for the right to sit there.
So, John, yeah, so this may sound like the first question I ask you, but we have a lot of people on Facebook who are great defenders of property rights.
I am as well.
It's in the Constitution. And what do you say to people that I have a constitutional right to manage my property as I see fit, and if I want to remove a tree, then that's my constitutional right, and the government should not be infringing upon that right? How do you address those kind of questions?
Well, you know, John, I'm afraid a lot of times it comes down to a question of morality. is my take on it. I believe it's a question of morality, and a person, I told a little story at the planning board, and I'm going to tell it again.
Please do.
About the Vikings, okay? The Vikings were rowing across the Atlantic, and they were rowing and rowing. It came break time. And one of the Vikings pulls out his sword, and he starts spinning it on the bottom of the boat. And the guy next to him says, "Hey, what are you doing?" He says, "Mind your own business. It's my seat." Well, we just can't take that attitude, John. And I'm afraid that's what people do. It's just like if I go out here in my backyard and I dig down to the aquifer and I start dumping oil in it, that's my property. I can do what I want to on it, right? If this guy's got a 200-year-old tree on his property and he wants to cut it down, morally, it's up to him, unfortunately. Now, I would like to say that somebody really does not own a tree that's 200 years old or 150 years old because it predates your grandpappy and going to probably outlive your grandchildren.
Well, that's a good response. I'm sure we'll hear more about that. John, we talked earlier about a map of this historic trail.
Boy, I'll tell you, after these maps, I'm going to let you have them. Hang on here a second. All right. I want you to look at this tree and remember it. This is a 19-foot, 8-inch tree. It sits at the corner of Muskogee Road, where actually it's Beck's Lake Road, just right almost. That's Road Zinc is on the other end of the tree. If you go to the right there, go to the north, Road Zinc is there. And this tree is a corner marker tree for an old trail. So just remember that. And this tree is, I believe, the largest tree because of manipulation that I've come across. This particular tree was called the Gary Gibson Heritage Tree, and I believe because of the growth pattern and whatever, it has been manipulated, and it may be over 300 years old. Even though it's only 26 foot, it may be upwards of 300 plus. So that's impressive. And that is the now this is one in Jacksonville, Florida. I was over there and just happened to be looking at it, and these trails run across the country from Tallahassee all the way to Jacksonville, up to Virginia, and over to Texas. Okay. Now, I'm going to need to close this out, folks, and get back to my, how do we escape? Escape me here. There we go. And we're going to close this.
Well, John is pulling up the map, and this was an interesting map he showed to the planning board. It is an old surveyor's map. He'll tell you how far back it goes, but it shows, and he has overlaid some of these trees he has seen up in the North County onto this map, and it shows a clear line like these were, in fact, trails. So before we finished up today, I think this map really drives home his point.
Can I zoom this?
Yeah. Let's see what we're going to do here.
Zoom this?
Yeah.
I thought there was a drop down for the zoom. Okay, here we go. We're going to try to zoom it this way. Rats.
John's got a Facebook page, by the way. You can certainly search it on Facebook, the Heritage Tree Project, and it's one of a number of growing tree-related Facebook pages we've noticed in the last couple of months here in Pensacola. John, I'm not sure we're going to be able to get that map up this afternoon, but it's certainly on your Facebook page, and we'll put it. We'll put a link to it. We'll put a marker to it so that those of you who are watching will be able to take a look at this. This is a very impressive picture. So we're, as you're educating people in here, is there a likelihood that you're going to be able to get the state of Florida interested in folding some more research and folding these trails into the Florida Trail Program?
That will depend in large part upon the county's request. That will depend upon. Now, I have requested that the county hire a staff archaeologist, at the planning board meeting and at the county commissioner meeting. As most everyone that lives here knows, we have some wonderful archaeology all the way from the bay where the Deluna wrecks lie all the way up to the Century on the north end of the county. There is prehistoric archaeology and historic archaeology as well. There's just really a phenomenal amount here that if we're not careful, we're going to bowl over it, and once it's gone, it's gone.
John, thank you. Very enlightening and very interesting, and we'll get a copy of that map put up onto the comment section of this video, which will be around on Facebook, ECW Live, ECW, and other sites that it's been shared to this afternoon. But this is part of our series that we started here a couple of weeks ago called For the Love of Trees, and this is the latest program we have. There'll be more to come, so I want to invite all of our friends who watch today to stay tuned with us as we continue this series. John, thank you once again for coming in this afternoon.
Thank you, John, for having me. Thank you so much.
So for Teresa Hill and all of our friends here at ECW Live, I want to thank you for joining with us, and we'll be back again very shortly with as we here this afternoon as we continue our series on looking in depth at the Mayor of Pensacola's transition report with guest Christian Wagley. That'll be coming up here in a few minutes, so please stay with us, and thank you for joining us.
Have a great evening.